Welcome back. If you haven't dropped off or mailed in your ballot for Tuesday's election, it's time to get on it. If your ballot isn't in by 7 p.m. Tuesday night, it will not be counted. And then once they're turned in, what happens next and how quickly your ballot is processed, well, it depends upon the county in which you live. Well, in Denver, the first step is verifying the seals and sorting the ballots for the signature scanners. Ballots are then weighed to identify if there are more or fewer than 3 pages inside. Then they're separated from the envelopes and scanned to tally the votes.
If there's any mismark on a ballot, a bipartisan team will review each of those marks to determine the intent of the voter.
So far, Denver County alone has had more than 100,000 ballots returned, and then clearly there's a lot to decide in this year's election. The governor's race, along with congressional races. You'll vote on Colorado Secretary of State, Attorney General, Treasurer, plus more than a dozen statewide issues, most seats in the state legislature, and then there are countless city, county, and school district issues that will be decided. And helping us keep an eye on all of these races, Marianne Goodland of ColoradoPolitics.com and Blair Miller of the DenverChannel.com. Thank you both for being here. Let's start with John Hickenlooper first and talking about possibly running for president, probably running for president. Does he have a chance? I know we ask this every time, but does it seem like he's inching closer and closer to a yes?
I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah, he's definitely inching closer to a yes. I think it's almost an absolute yes at this point. Maybe he just let the cat out of the bag a little early. But as far as from my perspective, is it a good idea is a whole nother question. You know, you looking at the voting age demographics of the Democratic Party getting younger and younger, you know, looking towards more women and people of color. So whether or not John Hickenlooper fits any of those molds for those young voters moving forward, I think that's kind of a big question for me.
And I'd agree with that. He is not well known, although he is certainly pushing his name recognition in states like Iowa and New Hampshire, places that he was in New Hampshire this week. He was in Iowa, I think, 2 weeks ago. And in both places, he has made it very clear that he's moving toward that decision.
I mean, he's unconventional, right? I mean, he kind of fits the Trump mold in a sense, where he's a business guy turned politician. Will that ring for anyone?
I think after 8 years of governor, it's hard to sort of separate yourself from being a politician, no matter what your pedigree was beforehand.
All right. Well, we'll see. Okay, so when it comes to who will replace him, what are you seeing? I mean, we have new polls out this week that have this race closer than ever.
The polling pretty much looks good for Jared Polis, and it's really hard. And you look at the polls that show him above 50% or at 50%. Once you hit 50%, it's really, really hard to drop below that.
Right, and we had 2 pollsters from last week basically say that these final polls that were done at the very end of October that were released on Thursday. I mean, one of them, Chris Keating, gave Jared Polis a 98% chance. I don't know if that's quite the statistical reference everyone else would want to use, but I mean, 5% is the lowest spread we've seen so far in what, 4 polls at least?
At least. Yeah.
But we also know what we learned about polling in 2016, right? That 98% sounds like a big number, but there are so many variables out there.
I think that's a big thing. You can't write anything off, and you can't necessarily look at statistics, because if somebody has an 80% chance, that's still 1 in 5 for the other candidate, and that's not really huge long odds there, I think.
And as we talk about the number of ballots that have been turned in, we look at those daily. I mean, we know that women are turning in their ballots, and Democrats are also turning in their ballots a lot quicker than they were, say, compared to 2014. What do you interpret from that?
And if you look in places like Adams County, Jefferson County, women are outvoting men. Democrats are outvoting Republicans. This has been true almost from day one.
And I think the big interesting thing there is, if those two cancel each other out, then you look at unaffiliated voters, and in the polling, those spreads have skewed very hard towards Democrats.
Which makes things look very good for Democrats, particularly when you look at some of these races that are likely to come down to the wire. At least 2 of the state Senate races are right now, we're hearing, are just neck and neck. The Attorney General's race is neck and neck.
In fact, let's talk about some of the state races, Marianne. I know you spent a lot of time at the State House. There's a handful of races that I mean, for the first time in a long time, we are seeing major money spent on these state races. So what's at stake here, and which races should we be watching?
I think that the 2 state Senate races, there are 5 state Senate races that have drawn the most money. But if you look at the spending in just the last 2 weeks, $7.5 million on those 5 state races,
yeah, it's big money.
And more than $4.5 million on 2 of those races. And this was up in Adams County, the race between the Democrat Faith Winter and the incumbent Republican Beth Martinez Humanic, and then the race in Wheat Ridge in Jefferson County between Jesse Danielson, the Democrat, and Christine Jensen, the Republican.
So why those 2 races? What's at stake there?
Control the state Senate.
Yeah.
That is the biggest game in town.
So are those the 2 races to watch then?
Those are the 2 races I'd be watching on Tuesday night. There's a third that you might be keeping an eye on. It's in Jefferson County, in the southern part of the county, between the incumbent Republican Tim Neville and the Democrat Tammy Story. And that one is pretty much, at least what we're hearing, is that one's likely to go to Story, but I'd still keep an eye on it.
What else should we be watching Tuesday night, Blair?
I mean, I think you look at really all the state races. I mean, you're looking at, open races between Phil Weiser and George Brockler. Not an open race between Wayne Williams and Jenna Griswold, but I think if we see this Democratic shift or this blue wave, I mean, you could see Democrats leading the state legislature and every major state office. But it's really tight margins, as Marianne said, that we've seen from polling and from talking to people.
Okay, well, I know we will all be watching Tuesday night. Blair, you and I will be here. Marianne, I know you will be writing for ColoradoPolitics.com. So we are all in on Tuesday nights.